Today, we're going to have a chat about property development with my business partner, Greg Hankinson, Director of Metropole Construction and Metropole Development Projects. Now, I don't know if you've ever considered getting involved in property development, but it seems to me that more and more investors are today. I mean, there's some real benefits in it. You manufacture capital growth, you actually get higher rents, you make the developers profit, you can buy your properties at wholesale rather than at the retail level, giving you a one-off hit, and then obviously the long-term growth of a good investment property. But property development isn't for everybody. There are some pitfalls. Sure, there's lots of great advantages. So today I want to give you a bit of an outline on what to look out for and maybe to better understand where you are in your journey of property investment, whether property development is right for you. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Well, with our fragmented property markets at the moment, some performing and others languishing, many investors are looking to manufacture capital growth by getting involved in property development. Now, while the process of property development, it can be a lot of fun, it's not without its pains and considerable risk. When all goes well, the results are fantastic. But if things go wrong, over the years I've learned they can really go wrong. So today I'd like to give you some insights into getting started in property development with Greg Hankinson, my partner in Metropole Construction and Director of Metropole Project Development Division. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Michael. Nice to join you again.
Well, Greg, we can't teach everybody everything about property development in 1 hour. However, I'd like to give them some ideas because there are new websites out there, masterclasses out there, blogs telling you it's easy to become a property developer, but I'm not sure it's as simple as all that. So before people actually even listen to you, maybe we should give them an explanation of why they should listen to you rather than maybe some of the people who've done one or two developments in a booming time and think they know it all.
Sure. I've been a registered builder and property developer for coming on 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're almost catching up to me, Greg.
I'm almost catching up to you, yeah, year by year. But I'm still learning. You can't learn it all. You can't learn it all in 1 day event or a 1 week event or even a year event. I'm still learning as I go. I've been doing property development for a very long time. I've seen it all, but I still get surprises.
Yes. And the market keeps moving, things keep changing. So there's things within the development process that give us surprises, but also council regulations, finance, other issues. So we're going to go through some of those now. And again, we can't cover it all, but we are going to allow people to find out more at a workshop that you're running. We've been running property development workshops, Greg, since I think it was about 2004, the first one. And we're going to be teaching participants how to become a property developer based on your 30 plus years of industry experience. So maybe we should start with a couple of rules about property development, how to make it a success. And then I'd love to pick your brain about some of the mistakes to avoid. I want to give a bit of a declaration. You have built many of my projects over the years, over many, many years, and all of mine, and that for many of our clients. So you're very actively involved, not just as a developer, but helping people become what I call armchair developers, allowing us to complete the project from concept to completion, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. So let's have a look at the 10 rules to help your property development project be successful. Then we can talk about a number of mistakes to avoid so you don't fall into the trap that many beginning investors and developers fall into.
Okay, so where do we start, Greg?
The first one is you need to get your ducks in a row. Get all of your ducks in a row and do the planning. You need to start with a plan. Are you going to keep the development long-term as a long-term investment? Or are you going to sell one or two or all of the projects or all of the buildings at the end of the development? So you've almost got to start, reverse engineer it if you like, Michael. So start with the end in mind. What's the purpose? What's your why?
Yeah. Well, that's a theme that comes through all these podcasts anyway, even for property investment, because different people are playing different games, and even in the property development world as well. So you've got to get your ducks in a row. You start with the plan. And I think you've also got to get your consultants sorted out, your finance sorted out, your ownership structures, especially if you're going to sell some and keep some. You've got to get a good team around you, Greg.
So having a real clear plan around that. I mean, we've all heard it. Prior proper planning prevents poor performance.
Wow, that was very clever.
Oh, it's all the P's.
Yeah.
My dad had a very crass term that was in line with that. I won't share that today, but effectively, you've got to have a plan in place. If you don't plan, you're planning for failure.
Sure. Okay. Well, the next step's understanding about property development.
Understanding where we are in the property cycle. We all know property is cyclical. After a downturn, there's another upturn, and so on and so forth. The time frames in between the upturns and the downturns changes, but it's cyclical. It's critical to understand where we sit in the current property cycle, and then we can plan our development to maximise our returns around that.
I think that's a really good point. So there are some booming markets around Australia at the moment, and people in Perth, for example, may think, gee, my property's gone up 25% last year. I can actually pull down the old house, build something new. But since it takes up to 2 years or more, it's quite likely that market will already be in the downturn. That's really not when you want to get out or finish up your property development, is it?
No, that's right. And I guess that's where it goes back to the first point. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have a plan in place. You want to make allowances in your planning and your budget according to where you're sitting in that property cycle.
Okay, well, we'll spend a bit of time at I actually won't be there. You and Brett are going to be spending time at the Ultimate Property Development Workshop explaining the property cycle and where each state is and going through it state by state. But as a bit of a hint, for example, Melbourne's where Brisbane and Perth was 3 years or so ago. Everyone seems to believe Melbourne's going to pick up. It's a good time to buy. Not that we're trying to time the cycle, but you've got to be cognizant of the cycle. So in my mind, it's actually a very good time to consider getting into the development market in Melbourne.
All the indicators that we're seeing, Michael, are suggesting that Melbourne's overdue for a run. We've gone through the challenges of COVID and all of those things. We're, for the most part, on the back of that now, and the expectation is that Melbourne's the next market that's going to see significant growth. It hasn't done so for a little while, so it's due, isn't it?
Sure. Now, before people say, hey, guys, you're biased, yes, we are, but we're biased at doing what's correct for our clients, and you and your team are doing developments in Brisbane, and we've got offices in Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. We're not location-specific, are we?
No, we're not. But we also practice what we preach, right? So we're doing our own developments in these areas as well. So we're in the market, not only for our clients, but for ourselves as well.
Sure. Okay. So we're working through, you said 10 points, looking forward to hearing them. Point number 3, Greg.
The third point is do very careful pre-purchase due diligence. Don't believe the selling agents when they tell you the property is going to be the next great development site. Why wouldn't we listen to real estate agents, Michael?
Well, really interestingly, I want to share a story, and you've heard it years ago, of a gentleman who, interestingly, not having seen him for 50 years, I caught up with Bill's son at the airport and then spoke to Bill, who went out one Saturday morning to buy a loaf of bread. True story. Walked past an auction, got all excited, and the agent told him that this is a potential 3-unit development site. STCA was the wording on the board, subject to council approval. Unfortunately, there was such a steep slope on the site that even though if you laid it flat, you possibly could have got 3 townhouses on it. The way construction had to occur because of the site constraints, he could only get 2. So the magnificent purchase he thought he got really, really didn't work out at all. So agents don't know about these things, and councils won't tell you beforehand either, will they, Greg? You can't say, hey, if I buy 24 Smith Street, will you allow me to build 2 units?
They're in the market to sell property. They're not particularly fussed about zoning and regulations and council compliance and overlays. And on overlays and compliance things, The goalposts are shifting all the time. So we need to be on top of all of the requirements around planning and development.
One of the big ones, I know your team gets into a lot of detail with the trees. You'd think, oh, well, I can just pull down that tree if it's, I can put the driveway there then. But some councils are very fussy about certain trees. So in this point where you're saying do your due diligence, it's doing due diligence on the site, on the topography, on the zoning. And just because you've seen 2 townhouses or 3 being built down the road doesn't mean you can do it yourself in this particular site, because zonings change from one area to the other within one street, from one side of the street to the other. And then you've got to look at the title. Are there covenants? Are there easements? Are there overlays? In a lot of Brisbane, there are flood overlays. In fact, in large parts of Melbourne, there are flood overlays too, aren't there? Water overlays.
It's just a minefield. And unless you can bank on it, unless it's an absolute certainty, you have to steer away from these things, or at least understand it.
Now, the agent isn't being deceptive. They don't understand this, do they?
They don't. They really don't.
Yeah. Okay, next point, Greg.
We need to get your budget right.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be very, very honest with yourself and very clear on putting together a detailed feasibility study. It has to be realistic rather than optimistic. So we can't rely on hope and we expect the market to move, or we hope the market will move. It's got to be rock solid and include all of the little costs that beginners tend to forget. In our feasibilities, we've got to allow for a contingency in case the unforeseen things crop up, because they always will. We see it on every job. And the contingency that you allow should be representative of your experience.
That's a really good point. So you, having done it a long time, can get away with a smaller contingency, but every property has something, every development has something go wrong. And when it crops up, we can say to clients, hey, told you that was going to happen. I didn't know what it was that was going to happen, but this is what you've allowed the money for. But I think one of the points I'd like to clarify that you've said already is you've got to be honest with your feasibility, because you can always do the numbers and figures and make them look okay. You just tweak this a little bit and that a little bit. But we use a very detailed feasibility program, not a simple Excel spreadsheet, to make sure that we don't leave any of the little things out.
One of the challenges, Michael, with being a property developer and investor is to remove the emotion. If there's emotion involved, you really want the feasibility to look right. You might believe it will, but you've got to lock those numbers in and be realistic about it.
Now, in the introduction, I said property development can be fun, and I almost bit my tongue because a lot of people come to us saying, I'd like to become a property developer. They want to have fun doing it. This shouldn't be fun. I often say, if you want to have fun, go bungee jumping, go trail bike riding. This is a very serious business, isn't it?
Well, you just said it. You've got to run your property portfolio and property development as a business. The fifth point, Michael, is you don't overpay. It's important to buy your development sites at the right price, allowing you to make a fair profit. Otherwise, you're immediately at a disadvantage. And remember my last point on getting the budget right. If it's not in your budget, it comes out of your profit, comes out of the bottom line.
Mm. So how much profit do you allow? Well, I know, because I've seen your notes for the Ultimate Property Development Workshop, how much you allow isn't what we used to allow in a profit margin in the old days. That would have been good. But having said that, one has to allow for how risky the development is, how long it's going to take, how many unknowns. So it's not even as simple when you do your budgets as how much profit you should be allowing for.
The profit changes, and again, it's cyclical, so it depends where you're sitting within the overall market or even the local market. There's markets within markets, as we know. I know you talk all the time about what's happening in the market.
So if you overpay, you're going to be chasing your tail the whole time. The trouble is, we're buying older properties close to their use-by date, but we're often competing with emotional owner-occupiers who sometimes want to renovate them, and it's worth more to them than it is to us. They're buying with their hearts. We should be buying with our calculators.
Yeah, 100% right. The sixth point, Michael, is to get a good team around you. Your team's likely to involve a property lawyer, an accountant, finance broker, an architect, a real estate agent, a project manager or a contract administrator to oversee the whole process. Remember, if you're the smartest person in your team, you're in trouble.
That's right. So it's really hard to know which team to get, who to get. But again, it's hard for me not to say, why not consider using the team at Metropole, because we've done it so long, so often, and are still very active in it. What about timeframes? How much should you allow? How long does it take to get a development out of the ground and finished?
Well, it really depends on what sort of development we're talking about. But as a rule, if we're talking small boutique developments, which is where we spend majority of our time on boutique townhouse development, we typically allow for 6 months minimum in the concept and town planning stage, but it can extend out to 12 months.
I guess what tends to happen is we buy a property and you have to hold it for maybe up to 12 months, because when you put a tenant in place, they usually take a 12-month lease. And then the building, how long it takes, I guess, depends upon the complexity of the project. Is there underground car parking? How many units you've got? But in general, I think most beginners should be starting on what some people call duplexes or 2 townhouse developments. They are simpler. They're less likely to go wrong. The council's more likely to approve them. They're more likely to fit in with neighbourhood character. And then you can, if you want to, work up to more complex multi-storey developments, Greg.
And they fit within the finance constraints. Finance becomes very, very difficult when you start looking at things that are based more on a commercial loan basis.
That's an interesting point, because most people don't recognise how banks look at property developments and what they look for and what they lend on. And that's one of the reasons at the Ultimate Property Development Workshop, we've got Andrew Myrams, who's from Intuitive Finance, who's been helping our clients, who actually has done, you built a development for him and his family as well. I don't think we're out of place saying that. And he's helped a lot of developers, because banks will only lend for some of the things in a development that they call hard costs and not soft costs. And they will look at developments differently, and different banks have slightly different regulations about what's a residential loan and what's a commercial loan. Even though it's not a commercial property, but they see it as a commercial endeavour, and you've got to have they have very, very different criteria for allowing those to proceed. So, yeah, finance is an important factor in this. Now, this was right at the beginning when you made your list of who get involved. The average banker doesn't understand development finance, Greg, and I don't think the average mortgage broker does either.
No, and if we talk about changing landscapes, I mean, the banking and finance industry is changing all the time, isn't it? It's extraordinary amount of change. So unless you're up to speed with all of those changes, then you're potentially behind the 8 ball right from the very, very start.
Okay, so on the point about being realistic with your schedules, you again got to, I guess, allow a contingency for unexpected things, because near the end of the project, you've got all the loans at the highest level. You've got the land loan and all the construction loans. So every month that goes over, it can get very expensive, the holding costs. Okay, you said there were going to be 10 points in discussion with the property development process. What's next?
Number 8 is be meticulous with your documentation. Put everything in writing, especially when dealing with consultants and contractors. This helps avoid misunderstandings and confusion. And it's easy to fall into the trap of, she'll be right, or we're mates, so it won't be a problem. No, it's not a problem until it is. And when it's a problem, it's always an expensive, either expensive in time or expensive in dollars, that at the end of the day, you don't need with effective planning. And again, we said it earlier, treat it like a business. It has to be a business. Get it all signed off on and approved in writing.
Next step, Greg?
Design your project with the market in mind. So to maximise your profits, your project must suit its target market, not necessarily your tastes. So I guess it goes back to what we were saying earlier, that reverse engineer it. Who's your target market? Who are the end users? And then work backwards and fit your design in to that very, very niche market where you know you're going to get the returns that you need out of your development.
Well, I guess in reverse, this is one of the mistakes that we may be talking about in a moment of actually building the wrong project in the wrong spot for the wrong market. And you know who's really good at that? The Block. The Block doesn't make money out of their development projects. They make it out of the advertising, and they're very successful at that. But that was very, very clear over the last couple of years also, where they over-spec things. They made it look really, really good. But you've also got to understand what your market wants, what they're prepared to pay, and what one geographic location accepts is not the same as what another one does. It depends a lot upon the demographics, Greg.
Yeah, The Block was a TV show.
Yeah.
First and foremost.
Oh, it's reality TV, Greg. Isn't it real?
Yeah.
Okay. Last point of your 10.
Don't be overconfident. I've seen many investors make substantial profits through property development. However, I've seen just as many developers, some smarter than you and me, Michael, lose it all through overconfidence and undertaking just one more development before the cycle ends, or a project with too little built-in profit margin.
Yeah, I've seen that too. You're right, over the years where people have done one or two or even three and it's worked. And so I'm now going to do a bigger one. And I'm going to do a bigger one again. And if only they'd stuck to what they were good at, it may not be as sexy, but it works nicely. So there is a process in place. And I know at the Ultimate Property Development Workshop, you're going to be gifting all the attendees our A to Z manual of property development that's also going to include all the checklists, our internal checklists that we use. And some people would say, well, why would you give all that away? And the answer is some people maybe would like to use our services, and that would be great, but that's what you're coming for. That's what you're paying for in this one-day workshop. So we want to make sure people are going to get a lot of value, because you're not our competition. We'd love you to be able to go out and learn how to do things and have some checklists to prevent you from making mistakes. And that's on October the 5th in Melbourne. But even if you're not based in Melbourne, and a lot of what we're talking about isn't Melbourne-centric, it'll be worth coming along, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be joined by Brett Warren, who's Metropole's National Director of Property, and he'll be talking about the market and go into some more detail about property. I'll obviously be going into a lot more depth about the property development process and the pros and cons and some more pitfalls. And we might even go into some feasibilities and put some project feasibilities together and just map that out and
show how it works.
What that looks like. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So I know, Greg, that Brett's going to be talking about the research required. And research for development is similar but has extra legs than research just for property investment. So you've got to go even deeper. That's going to be valuable to know which websites to go on and what to do. Okay, now I know you're going to be outlining mistakes at the workshop, not to be a negative person, because I've known you for so long, you're not a negative person, but just to show people what to avoid, things that are more likely to make their development profitable if they avoid those. And while we're not going to have time to go through all of those, I know you've given me a little list to discuss now, so maybe we can go through a couple of them now in detail, and we'll maybe should just mention some of the other ones you're going to discuss. Now, one of the ones we did say that is going to be discussed in details is not understanding the different finance needs for development. And this is what Andrew Morrims is going to talk about. Do you know what's a hard cost and what's a soft cost? Do you understand why banks will treat some developments as residential and lend them on similar terms and interest rates to just a buy and hold investment? And do you understand when they treat it as a commercial loan with different requirements about your experience, about the site, different loan to value ratios? By the way, there's sort of almost three loans during a property development as well. The other big thing a lot of people don't realise is what they can deduct and what they can't. And a couple of years ago, the tax department changed what interest you can deduct in a development. They've actually gone back and amended a few things, but Andrew's going to go into a whole lot of detail about that, because I'm pretty sure most people don't realise there is an element of their costs that they can't deduct, and there's an element of their costs that the banks just won't lend them against. But that's okay, as long as you know what they are in advance, Greg, then you're going to be planned for them and you're going to have the budget for them.
Yeah, that's right. And what you thought you knew 2 years ago is probably very different to what it is today. So in a lot of ways, it's a refresher on what can and can't be done.
Well, one of the big mistakes I've seen people make, and we've discussed that, we've seen this at Wealth Retreat, where there's some very, very successful investors there who've done developments. They've actually sold, made a little profit, ended up paying tax, but thought, gee, why didn't I hold that property, the first one I held in the first place, rather than go on to the next one? So you've got to know when to trade, when not to.
I spent the first 13 years of my developing career selling everything. And sure, I made some great profits.
I thought I had to. I didn't know any different when I started, Greg.
That's right.
Yeah.
I paid a lot of tax unnecessarily.
Yes.
And knowing what I know now, would I have done it differently? 100%.
Now, interestingly, this goes back to what you said at the beginning. You've got to plan ahead. So, Greg, I know at the workshop you're going to be discussing the 14 biggest mistakes developers make. And as I've said a couple of times, it's not to be negative about it. But I think one of the challenges is people don't often realise how much money it takes to do a development, do they?
No, and it really depends on the size of the development, but we're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to get into it. And there's a difference, as you said earlier, between hard costs and soft costs, what you can finance and what you can't finance.
I think one of the other factors is once you know what you're going to do, what ownership structure are you going to keep these investments in? Now, I know a lot of people actually go into a development with their brother, their sister, their uncle, a friend, and that's actually a good way to get into property development if you don't have enough to get into development on your own. I know you've built them for my son Bryce and his sister, and my son Bryce and his brother, a separate development. But what they did was set up the correct ownership structures up front, because people think, oh, that's easy. Look, we'll do the development and I'll own the left one and you own the right one, or I'll own the back one and you own the front one. But they don't recognise, Greg, that when you buy the type property, you own it in both names. And once you complete the development, you own it in both names. Both names are on both titles. So therefore, you've got to sell half of yours to the other party, and that involves all of a sudden you've got to pay GST and you have to pay tax on the extra cost, and the other party's got to pay stamp duty. And in reverse, when you buy half of the other party's unit, there's all those costs as well. And that can negate all the profit. So we will be talking a little bit about the setting up ownership structures correctly. And even if you're not doing it as a partnership, you've got to think with the end in mind, as you started right off with, Greg, and own them in the right structures to keep as an effective investment.
It goes back to the very first question, why? Why are we doing it? What's the outcome that we want? And then doing the due diligence and putting the documentation, or the paperwork, if you like, in place to support it. Having a very, very clear plan.
Now, one of the other big mistakes people make in my experience, and I've not been involved with it now as I've stepped back and you have been for a long time, is underestimating the power of local councils and neighbours in deciding what you can put on the site, Greg.
It's a constant challenge. Some municipalities are better than others. We like to understand what the framework is and the design criteria that each council have. And we try and work within that without pushing the boundaries too much, because ultimately we want to get a successful outcome and avoid going to VCAT, for example, and spending 12 months fighting for something that probably not going to have a major impact on sale value or yield or any of those things.
So councils have policies in all locations where they encourage development. They've got areas in their municipality where they discourage development, such as historically zoned areas, and they've got areas in the middle where they're comfortable with only with incremental development. Now, we know that the federal government wants councils to loosen up the criteria. We know that they want the councils to encourage development, especially around shopping centres, especially around transport nodes, especially around train stations. But the council laws are very much driven by their people that they represent, and there's NIMBYs and in every locality, aren't there? It's okay, do it over there, but not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard. Yeah, that's right. So understanding all of the different overlays that each council has, and they're all different, and they can be different on one side of the street to the other, Michael.
Oh, very much so. Definitely. So, as I said at the beginning or earlier on, just because somebody else has achieved it doesn't necessarily mean you can. And in Queensland, there are other overlays as well, such as you can't pull down certain dwellings that were built before a certain time. So, the councils, and to a degree, your neighbours have a say. The neighbours can delay things by going to tribunals. We try and avoid that. It's just not worth the hassle. Of course, there are other municipalities where it's very easy to get developments through. That tends not to be as profitable a development when by natural forces anyone can do a development there. So you've got to understand those things. I think one of the other big challenges is choosing the wrong builder. Now, this has nothing to do with all those unfortunate builders who went broke over the last couple of years. That was really related to just escalating building costs. But if somebody said to you, Greg, why should I go to Metropole Constructions? Why would I not use the guy down the road who I know? What would you say?
When it comes to property development, our greatest point of difference is that it's always investment based. So we're property developers, property investors ourselves, and builders work on a margin, Michael. So they're motivated to increase or escalate construction costs as much as possible because they put a margin on top. Whereas what we focus on is a return on investment. So we're about maximizing our clients' returns, having development appropriate designs that suit the end user in order to get as much return for our clients as possible. Because if they do that, they're going to go around again, aren't they, Michael?
Yeah.
And do it
So
again.
you've got to choose a builder who is adept at building the sort of thing you're building, not necessarily high-rise, not necessarily single-story homes. You've got to have somebody who has done this before. One of my favourite quotes I learned many, many years ago from Mark Twain was, what gets us into trouble isn't what we don't know, it's what we know for sure that isn't so. In other words, a lot of people get into property development not knowing what they don't know. So you're going to learn most of what you're going to learn in the first 2 or 3 property developments, and you're either going to pay a learning fee to the world, to the market, to the banks, or you may pay to get good advisors and consultants around you to stop you paying those learning fees, or you could come along to the Ultimate Property Development Workshop on the 5th of October in Melbourne, and I'll leave a link in the show notes where you will not only hear from this group of experts, and it's only a small group on purpose so you can catch them during the breaks and have a chat, but also we're going to be giving you our Ultimate Property Development A to Z manual with all the notes about each stage of the cycle, what you need, the development, what you need to know, what you need to do, and our own internal checklists. So, Greg, I think maybe the last mistake I'd like to mention in this podcast is people listening to this saying, hey, that was fascinating. That's all okay. That's for all the other people listening to this. It doesn't relate to me. They don't think that what we're doing is talking to them personally.
You're 100% right, Michael. Property development isn't for everybody.
Well, interestingly, people come along to us at Metropole and say, I'd like to become a property developer, I'd like to get involved. But you've got to understand where you are in the game, in your journey, in your property journey. So we definitely don't recommend it for people starting off. You've got to actually learn a bit about property investment, about ownership, about the challenges when tenants don't pay and the other problems. If you dig your teeth into property development too early in the journey, it's not going to work for you. You probably won't have the stamina to hold on. Having said that, though, once you've got a couple of investments under your belt, and if you have sufficient finance, I believe property development is a great way to actually manufacture capital growth. In other words, you buy the site, you build, and if you act as the developer, you're making the developer's margin. And when you eventually get a tenant in place, the tenant doesn't know you bought it, built it at wholesale, so they pay you retail rents, so you get great rent. You've actually manufactured capital growth, so you get capital appreciation, a one-off hit, and then from then on, if it's in the right location, you keep getting capital growth at a good rate. And the banks at the end of the project, if you've done it well, will lend you not on what it cost you, but on the valuation, which if all goes well, should be substantially more than what it cost you. So often you can get some or all of your money out to go all over again. Or if not, if you leave the money that you put in to the project there, then you get really great returns. And Greg, it's very, very tax efficient because the average depreciation allowance on individual townhouses that we're building for our clients, in each individual one, is often around $35,000-$40,000 in the first year, which means that you don't pay tax, I should say, on the first $40,000 of your rent that you get in. So it's a very great way. Well, that's the way a lot of wealthy people in Australia have built their wealth, isn't it, Greg?
Yeah, it is. It's about leverage, but it's also capitalising on what's happening in the market. And if we go back to the very start of the conversation where we talked about where the market is, particularly in Melbourne at the moment, it's just boosted by where we are within that cycle.
Well, some people are saying, yeah, but building costs have gone up that much. Maybe I shouldn't do it now. Oh, the market isn't good. Interest rates are high. Maybe I shouldn't do it now. And if they ask me that, I say to them, yes, building costs have gone up and they're not going up as much. But you really think building costs will go down? And they look at you and say, no. And okay, what do you think about the cost of land? Do you think that's going to go down? No. So it'll actually never get cheaper to do it than now. And so therefore, if you've got the finance and if you've got the ability to see through a 2-year project, for some people, property development is appropriate. And for others, coming along to the property development workshop and understanding all the principles, if it stops them making mistakes, even if the intention is not to stop them getting in property development, but if it stops them making $100,000 mistakes, boy, that would be a good investment of the day, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, for sure.
So thanks for going through all that. So we've skirted around some of the issues. We've gone into detail in some, but that's really why we need to spend a whole day on it. I'll leave links to the Ultimate Property Development Workshop in the show notes, or you can go to realestateworkshop.com.au, realestateworkshop.com.au. And Greg, I'm actually not going to be there. I was doing this with you for years and years, but I know you, Brett, and Andrew Morrams are going to be there. I'm looking forward to hearing how it all goes.
I'm sure it'll go fine. So Saturday the 5th of October at Ridges Hotel in Melbourne.
And I'll be away on vacation. Fantastic. Thank you for your time, Greg.
Thanks, Michael. Nice to chat.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to talk to you about doing the remarkable. And this lesson comes from one of my mentors, the late Jim Rohn. So when it comes to meeting and conquering the negativity in your life, the things that haven't worked well in your life, here's a key question for you. What can you do starting today that will make a difference? What can you do during economic chaos? What can you do when everything goes wrong? What can you do when you run out of money, or when you don't feel well, or when things have all gone sour? What can you do? Now, Jim Rohn would say, let me give you the broad answer first. He said, you can do the most remarkable things no matter what happens. He said people can do incredible things, unbelievable things, despite the most impossible or disastrous circumstances. Now, here's why humans can do remarkable things. Because humans are remarkable. Jim Rohn said humans are different to any other creation. He said when a dog starts with weeds, he winds up with weeds. And there's a reason. It's because he's a dog. But that's not true with human beings. Humans can start with weeds and turn them into gardens. Humans can turn nothing into something, sense into fortunes, disaster into success. And the reason they can do such remarkable things, according to Jim Rohn, is because they are remarkable. So try reaching down in yourself, and you're going to come up with some more of those remarkable human gifts. They're there. They're waiting. They're waiting for you to discover them, to employ them. And with those gifts, you can change anything for yourself, anything that you wish to change. So I challenge you to do that, because you can change. So if you don't like how something's going, if you don't like how something's going for you, change it. If something isn't enough, change it. If something doesn't suit you, change it. If something doesn't please you, change it. You don't have to be the same after today, ever. If you don't like the present address where you are, change it. You're not a tree. You're not stuck in that spot. If there's one thing to get excited about, it's your ability to make yourself do the necessary things to get the desired results to turn the negative into success. And in my mind, that's true excitement. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. Hey, but before you move on to the next podcast you're hoping to listen to, please let me remind you that I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher that we call Demographics Decoded, where we unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. This is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, business or entrepreneurship. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, please stop for a second and subscribe on your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. Now, if you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody else who'd benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcast, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just talk to them, tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour. You're definitely going to be doing me a favour in helping in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, you can catch up with me in between these shows on social media, or you can join my private Facebook group. Just go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I've got a special bonus for you to say thank you for subscribing. Just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There's a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. That's my way of saying thank you to you for taking the time to listen. Oh, by the way, if you haven't listened to the many podcast episodes we've already got, we're well into our 600s of episodes now. You can always listen to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?